So throughout your life and your artistic career, you have made it a point to lift up the voices of living composers. You premiered a significant number of new works for chorus and orchestra. You yourself have written a number of works. And I think the last portion of the program, your fourth movement, is a wonderful example of your legacy in premiering new works. And I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about the last three pieces in that context, the pieces by Lily Boulanger, by Frank DeKelly, and by Jake Heggie.
Well, I, of course, wanted to end with American music. And I think that I've worked with so many wonderful composers and we call them friends, but both Jake Heggie and Frank DeKelly have been lifelong friends. And I have made Delos recordings of their choral works. Besides what I premiered, a full Frank DeKelly album and a full Jake Heggie album on the Delos label. So they are the ending portion that we'll talk about. But how does Boulanger fit at the beginning of this last section? First of all, I conducted the first performance of this piece. It is a work that has existed for a long time as a choral composition. She won the Prix de Rome with this work. She was an amazing talent. I feel, I've done a number of her works on concerts. I've specialized in Boulanger, and then finally, with the help of Lee Kadudi, went to the Paris Library to the original handwritten score of this choral orchestral work that had never gotten a performance edition made, and made a performance audition. So I got to premiere this work. It's called Soir sur le Plain, which an evening on the plain. It is a poetry of Albert Samin, a French poet. We have just come out of the Brahms in this, which we talked about in another session here, which has a dark nature to it, but ends in a light nature, and ends in beauty. This Boulanger piece in this poem is just all about the natural beauty of the world. It is this beautiful poetry that tells us about what a sunset is like, and how watching the sun go over the fields and seeing a worker with a scythe resting. It's all about the peace of the evening and the sunset. So it sort of continues the thought of the end of the Brahms, but in a completely new style. And Boulanger is in the time of the Impressionists and of Debussy and Ravel. And in my estimation, she is should be of equal stature to Ravel and Debussy. The problem is that she only lived till she was 25 years old. And you wonder what would have happened if she could have gone forward. She was the first woman to win the most prestigious prize of the time in composition, the Prix de Rome. It's sort of like the Nobel Prizes of today. At that time in history, this was the most prestigious thing you could win. She won it. She wrote this piece applying for that competition, and then she won the competition the next year with another piece. But it's interesting, and I don't mean that decisions in a competition like this should determine the worth of someone, but Ravel tried 5 years in a row to win the Prix de Rome. He never won it. Lily Boulanger did win it, but she has a beautiful texture of composition. I mean, the whole concept of Impressionism and the blurring of lines and the softness of contours of the music, she is a genius at. She also, in other works, she also has power in her works. But this was a very sickly girl. She was ill her whole life. But what she accomplished in that short life we need to be very aware of. And when we look at the great talent, it shows how terrible it has been through history that women have not been able to succeed in their talent, that you don't, that the composers are all white males, and dead white males that we listen to. We have changed that. And Rob, you have been a master at this in finding these wonderful new works of women composers that you have been having Pacific Chorale do. But I think when we look back at Lily Boulanger, we have to think about the difficulty that women had. I mean, go back to Fanny Mendelssohn, in that she wrote works and didn't use her own name because nobody would do it because a woman wrote it. So I think that's something I want to stand for in supporting Boulanger. But it's not just that activism, it is about the beauty of her music. I love it. I love it. We will move from this into Frank DeKelly and Jake Heggie. And to me, these two works are very closely related, and they're also related to the Brahms. Frank wrote his own poem for this. First of all, I had the privilege of premiering and commissioning Frank DeKelly's first choral piece. I tried for several years when he was the composer in residence for Pacific Symphony. I loved his writing, and I loved his writing for Winds, but I noted he had no choral music in his writing. So I started working with him. He said, I don't know how to write for chorus. No, I'm not comfortable with that. I won't. But I convinced him. I said, look, I'll commission you for a 6-7 minute piece, short piece, okay? I want you to write it for me. And so he decided to do it. And he chose a text called There Will Be Rest. It was a phenomenal success. After we premiered it, and then I conducted a performance of it in New York for the National ACDA conference. And after that conference, it became the biggest selling choral competition of the whole world. So that's how Frank started out his choral venture, whereas before he had stayed in the wind orchestra and the symphonic orchestra. So I choose one of his pieces that I did not commission. Before I say that, I just want to say that we commissioned Frank to write his first choral symphony, a large-scale work for the Pacific Symphony, Pacific Chorale, called The Shore. That is an amazing, amazing work. Mm-hmm. And my friend David Hazen in New York and I both say it is right on the top to us of works that have been written in the 21st century for choral orchestra music. I mean, the man is amazing. But this is a concert of small works that we're doing. And so I have chosen a piece that I want to see here. I want to get his text here. Frank is a poet as well as a composer. And he is expressing the same emotion that Hölderlin expresses in his poem that Brahms chose to set in the Schicksalslied. However, Frank's poem works backwards. Hölderlin starts talking about the gods and their beautiful life and rages about the terrible life of humanity. Frank starts his worrying about what we do with humanity, but says in the end, but I find through music that life is beautiful. And I want to, because it's what I'm trying to state through this Serenade to Music concert. Frank writes, sing, be, live, see. This dark, stormy hour, the wind it stirs, the scorched earth cries out in vain. O war and power, you blind and blur, the torn hearts cries out in pain. And to me, in what we are dealing with today, in all of the disagreement we have in life, I think this is something that is something we need to think about. Frank resolves this. But music and singing have been my refuge, and music and singing shall be my light. I absolutely love that poetry. And it's a very small, beautifully written a cappella composition. I wanted 2 a cappella pieces, but I'm going to bridge this directly into Jake Heggie's piece, which has very similar ideas in it. Jake Heggie has been a friend for a long time, as I said. He's an opera composer, and I met him when Opera Pacific did Dead Man Walking, his very successful earlier opera here in Orange County. The West Coast premiere was done at the Segerstrom Center of the Arts. I was totally taken by it. And we became friends then. I flew to Dallas to hear his first performances of Moby Dick that he did there. Another amazing opera. I think what is really important in what Jake does, he's a masterful orchestrator. He is a master at drama. He is put down by some people because they can't figure out whether he's a music theater composer or whether he's an opera composer. In other words, does he sit with classical music, or does he sit on the musical side where he's just entertaining people? The wonderful thing about him is that we need to stop having that argument because it is all music. And he brings those 2 elements together in a masterful way. I just love this plane he sits on between more popular music and classical music. But I mean, I think the man is a genius in his composition. But he composed this work for me. We did it for the opening performance. It would close the opening performance of Renée and Henry Segerstrom Concert Hall. And that, by the way, was 20 years ago. This is the 20th anniversary of that hall. I got to work in it for 10 years, the last 10 years of my career, and you are now in your 10th year.
Very fortunate.
Working in this beautiful space. But we closed it with this piece, and it has great personal meaning to me. He knew that I was from New Orleans, and so when we asked him to commission this closing, Hurricane Katrina had just happened in 2005, the year before. And so he had worked with Sister Helen Brigine, who was the librettist for Dead Man Walking, this unbelievable nun that lives in New Orleans and works in New Orleans. And she was there helping everybody through the crisis of Hurricane Katrina. So she became the librettist for this work. Again, they worked together on this. And it tells the story. I mean, it seems strange to think about a story about a hurricane because the beginning of it is just all fearful. People are dying. People are afraid of dying. People are trapped in the water. The piece starts with all of this tension. But then what she experienced was that she was involved with the New Orleans Jazz Festival, which has been held in April. As I said, I'm from New Orleans. That jazz festival is almost as big as Mardi Gras these days in New Orleans, but it's in April. The hurricane had happened in the fall, and New Orleans was still going crazy, but all of these jazz artists decided to really do something, and all came together for the New Orleans Jazz Festival in that year to help New Orleans come out of its funk, so to speak. And she talks about going to Bruce Springsteen was one of the artists that came in, and she talks about going to his concert, and that for the first time she saw people let loose of all their troubles of the hurricane and to just become joyful, happy creatures, looking to the future, seeing a road forward, and that music can change people that way. And I call the program the Serenade Music. Vaughan Williams starts the program, the Serenade Music. I call Jake's piece a serenade to the power of music in closing the concert. And the audience loved it the first time, they'll love it again. I mean, this thing rocks. It really rocks. I mean, he's using jazz and just unbelievable writing for the orchestra, and it just becomes a wild party at the end. So I think that it makes a great positive closing about how music can affect our lives.